Veliko mi je zadovoljstvo što večeras mogu pozdraviti i vas, ali i našu gošću i našu moderatoricu i autoricu. Večeras predstavljamo roman Možda Ester, KATJE Petrovskaje. Riječ je o bestselleru koji je preveden na 20 jezika, među kojima je i bosanski, odnosno riječ je o Bajbukovom izdanju, a kako je naša praksa ta da uvijek autore i autorice dočekujemo sa njihovim dijelima u našem izdanju, tako smo naravno učinili i ovoga puta. Katja između ostalog piše o jednoj potrazi za korijenima, što se savršeno uklapa u naš koncept koji podrazumijeva distancu od insistiranja na čistijim identitetima, i to najbolje možemo vidjeti na primjerima kada nismo ni najsigurniji od koga potičemo i gdje su nam korijeni. Sa Katjom će razgovarati naša draga Senka Marić, Bajbukova autorica, pjesnikinja i autorica iznimno uspješnog romana Kintsugi tijela, i ne sumnjam da ćete uživati u večerašnjem razgovoru. Podsjećam da u 19 sati i 30 minuta na istom mjestu ćemo ugostiti Svetislava Basaru uz moderaciju Navika Kabila, a potom Arona Grunberga uz moderaciju Krisa Kulemansa, i time završavamo drugi intenzivni dan 4. internacionalnog festivala književnosti Bookstan. Hvala mnogo još jednom na dolasku. Senka, izvoli. Izvini, možda sam zaboravila, nije možda, zaboravila sam reći, ukoliko je potreban prijevod, da uzmete slušalice jer će razgovor biti na engleskom jeziku.
Dobro večer svima. I'm going to switch to English right away so Katja can understand me from the beginning. I'm just going to say a few things about Katja. Katja is a Kiev-born German writer and journalist. She studied literature and Slavic studies at the University of Tartu, and I have to mention that one of her professors was Yuri Lotman. During the mid-90s, she studied at US at Stanford and Columbia Universities, and she defended her dissertation, The Poetical Prose of Vladimir Kodasevich. Okay, at the Russian State University in Moscow. Since 1999, she lives in Berlin. Maybe Esther, book that we're going to be talking about tonight, is her first novel, and in 2013 Katja was awarded by prestigious Ingeborg Bachmann Award for experts of chapter 5 of this book that tells the story of her great-grandmother that was maybe called Esther. Maybe Esther, as a novel, is a beautifully written, masterly paced, poetic, fragmented narrative of I think it's best to say, of the pursuit of the story of Katja's family, Eastern European Jews scattered across Europe during the 20th century. The book you wrote is trying to reconstruct the history of your family, and the first thing I want to ask is it like a quest for your own, or maybe to say your main character's identity? In a letter from Zed in the novel, you say, what do you need this person for? Why are you stirring up his ashes? So the question that I really mainly want to ask is, do we have to know where we come from in order to know who we are?
So many questions. First, thank you very much for invitation. I'm really very happy to be here. Dobry dan. And it's really very strange to talk in English. Of course, it would be very pretentious if I just switched to Russian, so it would be a false political message. But anyway, somehow it's still like more dear to come to post-socialistic world to present my book or to be translated. I really still feel like more honored than to go to the countries which were like. It's maybe it's a stupid thing, but I don't know, we grew up in a sort of very similar world with a very similar perception of literature and maybe perception of time, because there was no time in a certain way. So there is absolutely no necessity to know the roots, and I think it's also an age problem that you are dealing with many things in your life, and there is nothing original when you're like around 40 years old and you're starting to look in your roots. So maybe it's a sort of traces of old Kabbalah. To look back, it's also prohibited in a way, and you are starting these things in a point of maturity, and. I don't know, actually, I don't think my book is about family, and I don't think my book is about past, because it's not about past, it's about modern person traveling through Europe, stumbling over history, because if you're just moving from Berlin to Kiev, you are automatically in a sort of romantic move, Drang nach Osten, but at the same time, you are inside the war. Because if you are just moving from Berlin to Kiev, you are automatically inside the war. And actually, my book starts with the violence of words, because I was standing in the railway station in Berlin, and you just see in the roof of the railway station, "Bombardier, willkommen in Berlin." And what is this bombardier? And actually, bomb is the only European word which doesn't need any translation. So you are standing in the middle of Berlin, which is completely like bombed down, confronting these words, And actually, it's how everything starts. In the beginning was the word, and in the beginning was the word the bomb, So actually, it's a sort of my trip, and I was always like a little bit embarrassed that I'm talking about catastrophes. So I'm like going to Austria, and one of my grandfathers was and he was Ukrainian, the only Ukrainian, of course. He ended up in concentration camp as a war prisoner. So. First time in my life, I go into Austria to look for traces of prisoners' camps. So, is it about life or not? I'm traveling, but at the same time, I don't want to reduce life to this kind of obsessive watching for catastrophes, obsessive watching for your dead people or dead of other people. So actually it was always a sort of question to myself why I'm doing that. Why am I looking at that? So actually, if I were German, I was I had been socialized during these trips to Austria, because it's very typical thing to go to Austria for West Germans. But it was really my first trip to Austria, and I confronted all this beautiful landscape. So actually, it's a method of the whole book. I couldn't put anything aside on the way I was looking for something. So I tried to. So in the beginning, I thought I would write a sort of small novels about novellas, stories about people from my family, and like small reflections between these stories, and and on the end, this kind of reflection or total reflection on what I'm doing actually took the main voice, maybe the main road. But maybe I didn't answer the question. But
you definitely did. And I was just thinking, listening to you, like there is also like really visible some beautiful irony in your book, because the whole book text is structured as a research, as a pursuit, as an investigation, as you were saying yourself, trying to learn the facts, the history, and yet in the same time, like constantly over and over again, we are learning that we cannot really know anything, at least not for sure. So I think that's the reason why the story about about woman that was maybe called Esther, that's kind of like a central pivoting point of the book.
Yeah. Actually, I wanted to come back to say that actually this family story, it's not only just because it's my family. I used to say that family didn't interest me at all, you know, but somehow I really am, there are people who are really very connected, and I didn't feel, but suddenly I realized that in my family there is everything which is like opposed to the Soviet ideology, because actually storytelling, and you know it from here, this kind of family storytelling it could not be reduced to any kind of ideology. It's always like doesn't fit the concept, you know, not an ethnical concept, not a religious one, not in the whatever, you know. So actually, the biggest part of this book is about Second World War, and I grew up with all these stories, and I grew up with this big Soviet myth of Second World War, which consists of a huge amount of truth and huge amount of lies, yeah, in a very, very strange form. And it's really very hard to divide it. For example, we've never been told about, in my childhood, never been told about 6 million of war prisoners, Soviet. Never. My grandfather spent more than 4 years as a war prisoner in all kinds of places. So in the book I was questioning how it was possible to survive, and what does it mean for a person to survive? What kind of guilt is it? And the second, I grew up in Kiev, and we have in the middle of Kiev the biggest massacre during the I don't know even how to call this time, Second World War, when during 2 days more than 30,000 Jewish people were killed. Just so we've never been told, and I grew up in the city, and it's not like on another planet or sort of narrative from other people or something like that. It's a topography of your childhood, and. If you know and don't know, it's another question, but it was on the edge of Kiev, and actually when I grew up, or just now, it's almost the center of the city. So you're going to Babi Yar with metro, you know, and you're just in the middle of very strange landscape with 200,000 killed people. Because on the end, nobody actually knows, was it 100 or 200,000? So coming back to Esther, or to maybe Esther, I was researching many things, and I was reading about this Babi Yar really a lot. And actually, it's also another question how to tell these stories without ruining yourself, or without ruining your reader or interlocutor, because I was not thinking about reader, I was thinking about interlocutor. Because talking about violence, you are automatically multiplying violence. So it was also a sort of, and I mean in Sarajevo, you know about that even more than I. So I was looking for this kind of tender way, if it's possible. And I was reading about Babi Yar many things, and on the end I didn't really use anything, but I just understand how my great-grandmother was killed on the street of Kiev. And she was killed exactly on this first day when all Jews of Kiev were called to come to a certain place. And they didn't expect, of course, to be killed. And my great-grandmother was left in Kiev because she was very old, and my family moved very quickly. There is a story about that in the book. And my father suddenly told me that actually I have another relative who was killed in Babi Yar, but she never managed to reach it. So I was really like shocked by the sentence. Она была убита в Бабьем Яру, но она туда не дошла. So I was really, and I asked her story, and he said that, yeah, she was left aside in Kiev because she was very old, she couldn't walk, and everybody thought that they would be back in a few months. So, and actually, family of my father came back in 7 years. So, and that day, possibly neighbors told her to go to Babi Yar. She couldn't walk, so what the hell she had to go there if she cannot walk? And she went down to the street and was immediately killed by German patrol. And I asked my father, but what was your name? And he said, "KATJA Esther." So maybe Esther. And I was like, what? You were 9 years old. You had babushka at your place, and you don't know her name. And he said, yeah, my parents said mother, and I said babushka. And one of my grandmothers was Esther. So, and then it was the point. So I really thought, do I have right? And so what I'm doing if I say, okay, she was Esther. Yeah, possible, yeah? And actually, it was the moment when I understood that the woman who was called maybe Esther existed. But the woman, for sure, and I know how she was killed. And the woman whose name was Esther existed maybe. So, and it's a crucial point. So, and it's a crucial point how you are writing and what is modality of truth and how much uncertainty has to be told. And actually, it doesn't mean that I don't know how she was killed. It doesn't mean that I don't know that what happened in this day. I know exactly, but there are things I don't know and I have to accept them in my storytelling. Otherwise, I'm writing a novel, and it was exactly why I didn't write on my book the novel. Because I think I try to be truthful, even my perception tells lies, if you understand what I mean. But with Esther, it was a sort of moment when I understood the modality of telling story.
Well, if we stay there for a while, like when you're telling the story about maybe Esther, you're also telling the story about your family being evacuated, your father, young boy, leaving the building with the rest of the family. And there is a really interesting story there about a plant, a ficus. And apparently, that's again something we don't know for sure, but there was a big issue whether on the truck evacuating people, a ficus should remain or Katja's father. So I find that part really
It's a true
useful.
story.
Yeah. And so what I really want to say there is that, like, not being, it sounds beautiful as a literature, but it's also true. But it kind of raises the question of fiction and faction in real life and literature as well. So when Katja asked her father about it, first he told her about ficus, and then he couldn't remember it. And then eventually at the end he said, well, sometimes he was comforting Katja and saying, well, okay, there was a ficus there, definitely there was a ficus to make her feel better, I guess. And then he said something really beautiful. He said, sometimes that pinch of poetry is the very thing that makes memory truth.
I think it was the wrong quotation from Goethe or something like that, but anyway. In German it's clear, actually. In German version it's clear, yeah.
So do we want to hear it?
No. It would be twice wrong. Yeah, it's a very strange story, and actually it's how the truth emerged, because you always have a sort of lie or fantasy inside of the true story. And actually it was also a sort of depressive moment of writing, because I was looking for true stories of my parents. What actually happened to my grandfather in all these concentration camps? Why he didn't come back to my grandmother Rosa, and came back 40 years later? So it's like double Odysseus. It's my grandfather. So actually, there were so many questions on the strange behavior of people after the war. And so the story of my father and this evacuation was really striking. Also connected to this kind of, who from all these Jews was a communist and who not, and who could evacuate their family, and actually why the most Orthodox people actually died, because, you know, all these things were going through my head. And then I had this kind of grotesque, really ridiculous ficus, and my father was saved and evacuated just because his father took this ficus from the lorry truck. So I was asking my father, and suddenly he wrote part of his memoirs. He hates memoirs, actually. And there was no ficus, and I was really concerned about this ficus, how the ficus who saved the life of my father, who actually is sort of hero of my life, because otherwise I would have been born. And suddenly this ficus disappears, so like you feel like you are not existing, you know? So I was looking for this ficus, and on the end, it was almost the play of words, but it has nothing to do with play, because it's the language which already consists of these things, and we are just discovering them. So I was like doing my circles, and suddenly I really, on the end, I didn't understand, is it ficus, did this ficus who saved my father derives from the fiction, or fiction derives from ficus? And it's really, so it's not, I'm not guilty, it's the language. So that's the point. So in the end, it's something like really fictitious which saved the life of my father.
Okay. I just want to stay close to Babi Yar a bit more. Well, you saying, and obviously it's true because there is no exact number of the people who were killed and buried there. You state in your book it's between 100 and 200,000 people, and these are absolutely crazy numbers, especially because like there's a quality mark between 1 and 2,000. And I'll come back to numbers a bit later on, but I love the part of the book when you writing about how you arriving to Babi Yar, and you like describing the area, and you say metropolitan Kiev has long since encompassed Babi Yar, a kiosk selling Tuborg beer, a newsstand, the monument for murdered children. So what I want to ask is that remembrance, or is that oblivion? And like, what do monuments really do? Do they remind us that we have forgotten? Or like, is it even possible to forget? So I guess the question is, is it equally impossible to both remember and forget?
Thank you. I first come back to the numbers because it's even more abstract than your question. I was really always concerned about these numbers because we are talking about numbers, and I mean here it's also very critical how many deaths we can really understand, and what is this 6 million or 11,000 or whatever, you know. So I was really watching my own possibility to perceive numbers. So my grandfather was in this Mauthausen, which is really a sort of modest place in comparison to other terrible places. So I was comparing these numbers with other numbers, and I was trying to understand does it mean 100,000 people died in Mauthausen. So it's like nothing in comparison to other places. And at the same time, I was watching like people who were living just in the next district to just across the river in Kiev, and there were exactly 100,000 people. So I tried to understand how to kill them and then to bring them to life again. So all these things. So actually, numbers. It's one of the. I tried to control my humanity through numbers, and I didn't manage. I think for me was the border like 14 people. So back to Babi Yar. Yeah, actually it took me years to go for a walk there because it was for me like a sort of I couldn't go there. I just could not. And now, because in former times we always took a trolley, and it was like more human. went with metro because metro is just, you know, like, I don't know. So we went for a long time with trolley to Babi Yar, and in the beginning of Babi Yar, there is a church from 12th century, and it was the main road from Kiev to Chernigov when Moscow didn't exist. And, you know, it's like this sort of break of civilization. You know, you have this metro station and this church with frescoes of 12th century, and in between this kind of actually landscape which doesn't exist because in the Soviet time Soviets built the brick factory there, and okay, it's a long story. But anyway, even this landscape doesn't exist. So about monuments and memory, so in Russian and in German it's different because there есть памятники, нет памяти. Да? So it's a very strange thing because I think that there are some catastrophes we cannot find any ritual to commemorate. So we are putting something somewhere and we think that that's it, but actually nothing happens. But Soviet story is even actually much worse because there was nothing, not a stone, nothing, like almost 30 years after Babi Yar, and it was even prohibited to go there. And one of my friends was arrested there in the early 70s because he just put some flowers in Babi Yar, and he was arrested for Zerstörung, throwing the garbage in the public spaces. And so it was really like one catastrophe after another because it was prohibited to remember. So that's the first part of the story. But now it seems like everything is okay. All groups of people came. Roma and Sinti have their memorial. There is a Jewish memorial. There is for Orthodox priests, because many people were killed after Jewish people. Many people were just killed there from all kinds of groups. And but there is nothing like public discussion. There is nothing like I don't know. So it's like too late. You know, there was a point in the history when it was the moment to talk about that, and because now in Ukraine it's like too late. It only interests a small part of people, like intellectuals or people who really believe that we couldn't move further on without remembering. But there are like many narratives merged together, and now with the war between Russia and Ukraine, I mean, it's like there are so many other things that Babi Yar is just, you know, it's like also like in many countries, like to commemorate Jews, it's not like how to say it. It's not really a necessity of citizens of this city. It's more like an entrance to European Union, or sort of, you know, like a propusk, like Ausweis for civilization or whatever, you know. But actually the point is that it's not about other people. It's absolutely not about other people. You grow up in the city, you live in the city. It's not about some other people. It's about your city. It's about your topography. And actually, I think my whole book, actually, I was also a little bit embarrassed to be partly Jewish from my origin and to talk about these things. So for me, it would have been better to be, I don't know, Kazakh. Oh God, they have also stories and stories. Just to be another regarding this narrative. But the point is that there are no other people, especially when we are talking about victims. I'm again like, I don't know really what to do, because you know, I tried to create my own ritual towards things I could not regard and could not talk about. So actually I wrote my book in order to avoid to read other books on Holocaust or Gulag, because there are so many, and I don't have nerves. It's a stupid statement, but it's something like almost the truth. So it was like my personal ritual, you know. So, and I don't know if anybody can use my ritual for themselves, but it's not more. So I really don't know what to do with all these thousands and thousands places of Gulag, millions of places of any kind of violence. And, you know, I mean, it's like, what should we do with all that? And how, in what form? I don't have, because there is only local and only private and maybe sort of collective small decisions about this and that, but there is no like solution for everything. Oh. And you know, there are also many ways. You know, there is a sort of how do people regard this Spanish Civil War? Or, you know, in Spain, or how Germany regarded its own crime. It's completely, you know, different narrative. So sometimes in the society it's important to forget and maybe afterwards to remember.
I think your book is really important. We talked about it earlier, and I think it's important for many reasons, but one of them is reminding us that we ought to remember those horrible things that happened during the 20th century from each era. So like revisit the history and try to breathe in some sense into it. And I think that's something that your novel is saying, your novel that you don't like to call novel, is saying.
No, but really concerning novel and not novel, I mean, it's just fragments of the world. It's not, because novel still pretends, I mean, there are so many novels in the 20th century which are even less novel than my book, but it's about fragments of the world, so I'm not pretending to describe the world. I only see small spots, and I really don't know if the world between these not told stories worse or better, or let's say just completely different. Where we are now. I wanted to say also about about the family, that actually I was really very surprised that my narrative is exactly what, like against this kind of Soviet ideology, because there is a Holocaust, there is a war prisoner, and there is one guy who called Judah Stern. Maybe you can ask me about him.
Yeah. We talked about it earlier. Oh, just let me find it. What's around? It's really difficult for me, obviously, as you can, I guess, understand, to do this in English, so I'm reading a bit. It makes more sense. Okay, I love the story about Judah Stern, and Katja is going to tell us more about it. And I think the importance of that part of the book is that gives us the glimpse of those wheels actually in the background that put everything in motion, and also in the same time we are left with despair that we don't really know who or what controls them. And when I read about Judah Stern, I actually remembered the few sentences from the short story Nobody Will Laugh from Milan Kundera. When he talks about similar things, he says, no, I don't mean supernatural forces, but by human forces, by the forces of those people who, when they unite, unfortunately, still remain mutually alien. And I think that story about Judah Stern really illustrates that. And so, is that really a no-win situation? Does it improve? Do we always stay, like all of us, victims to those things that I just called wheels in the background?
Actually, it's a very strange story. I had a relative whose name was Judah Stern. And I mean, somehow I'm proud because it couldn't be more Jewish than that. And he's my grand uncle, and I really felt very strange because I grew up with this name Petrovskaya, and my brother is Vanya, and my mother is Sveta, and everything is like very Russian, and we are all in like Russian history and philology and all that. So, and suddenly my father told me, it was not suddenly, actually, it's not about, my parents were talking all the time, but it's very strange how you really suddenly realize something. There were many things which were been told from early childhood, and suddenly you are like 35 or 40 and you think, your aunt told you that they sent packages to Warsaw in 1939? What? From Kiev? So you're just suddenly realizing that they are talking about ghetto and sending packages from Soviet Kiev to ghetto, and you are thinking were the things kosher or not. So, and with Judah Stern, it was also sort of like you're suddenly noticing things because you are mature and you are living in completely different context, or you are gathered information from all over the world, different kind, and you are like suddenly see these things. So Judah Stern, my father once told me that his uncle shooted the German ambassador in Moscow in the year 1932. And I was like, what? With this name, just imagine this name in German newspapers in the year 32, Judah Stern. So, I mean, it's like a sort of phantom of Goebbels or I don't know, whatever, but it's my uncle, or great uncle, yeah. So actually he wounded the second person of the embassy in Moscow in the March. And of course, it was one of the biggest show processes. They tried to accuse Poland for all that. And actually, it's a very strange story. But through this story, I understood that Soviet Union was already absolutely ready to start the war against Poland, but Germany not. So it's really absolutely crazy story. I don't know why there are no PhD on this subject, but actually the story is also very critical in historical terms because all the sources we have my family who tried to tell the story of crazy guy, because, you know, to say, yes, it's our relative and we love him, it's like... he was a criminal, yeah, and actually it's also a question why all my family was not killed because there was an assassinator in the family, because it was absolutely enough reason to kill everybody during the Stalin time, and it was like the beginning of this all this kind of story. So we have like sources from the people who try to describe him as a mad person or just keep silence. And the second part of sources, huge part of sources is written by people who actually forced him to do it, or people who actually were on this side of like really Geheimdienst, I mean NKVD. We don't have any other sources. How you are going to deal with this case? So actually, it's absolutely, there was a Kafkaesque trial, and I was absolutely shocked reading this trial. It's completely, you know, and the main prosecutor of Soviet Union, Krylenko, was his actually prosecutor. So I really felt almost proud because I had a very well-known relative. But I was also shocked because I mean, I didn't understand, was this person that brave? That it was more important for him to say, I am doing whatever I want, just stupid things, you can kill me, but I show that Germany is responsible for hunger in Ukraine. Because it was 32, and it was at the beginning of hunger. And it was just because Germany was selling machines and buying corn. Yeah. So he behaved on this trial, and we have a protocol, like really absolutely, it's impossible. It's really like you are reading Kafka, because, you know, Krylenko is asking him, okay, you said you didn't shoot, but what are these 5 bullets are doing in this car? And he says, just ask bullets, you know. And there were like 500 people sitting in the hall, and like all this minutes. So he was behaving like really, like whatever. I just make my jokes. So it was really, I on the end. Studying documents, comparing him with Van der Lubbe, because it was the only thing my grandfather told about his brother. He said Van der Lubbe, you know, just this guy who started the fire of, or let's say he started the fire of Reichstag. So I really felt like my family is guilty, or my family somehow took part in this kind of split between Germany and Soviet Union with this name, because it was a huge campaign in Germany also to divide National Socialism from Jewish socialism of Soviet Union, and then they had this Judenstern. So it's absolutely crazy story, and actually it's not the only story in the book where I really felt, or maybe the reason to write this way was provoked by impossibility of historical discourse regarding these things. Because, and actually there are also some parts which are written in a sort of delirium. And actually in Judenstern there is this kind of delirium around Goethe and that kid and many other things, because you're just losing any sense of logic.
There are a couple of more things I would like to ask you too, actually, and I can ask them together, and then maybe. Okay, what impresses me?
We have.
We can do it in 5 minutes, and then we can see if somebody else would like to ask you something as well. The book is written in German, so like, and you write in a way, as we kind of established in the beginning, that it's a quest for your own identity. So like, well, for me, like when I speak English, it's not that only that I feel, but I am kind of a different person. Like I can slightly change my default settings. It kind of gives you freedom. So like, is something close to that the reason you chose to write in German, like having a freedom to find out, to step away from yourself to find out who you truly are?
Actually, there were 1,000 reasons. I tried to give you first 5. I just lived in Germany for a certain time, and it's the language I'm communicating with my friends. So, and actually, my book emerged from this kind of, you know, to meet somebody and to tell my story. And, you know, maybe that we are not really convertible in this kind of settled West European context. So we're like always a little bit more emotional and not really very, okay. So it was like really a sort of search of spoken language. At the same time, maybe I wanted to step out of this memoir discourse, because I thought that if I would write in Russian, I would go in this direction. Then I also thought that Russian has this kind of, at least at my childhood, this kind of flavor of moral right, you know? So we are like victims of this war, and we took over the fascism. I'm just simplifying everything, but anyway, writing in Russian on Jewish narrative, you are on the side of the moral, and I didn't want any kind of bonus, you know, like, okay, I am a Jew, therefore I am better than a German person of my age. So I really wanted to avoid this kind of bonus to be better than anybody who is of my age or whatever. So I just switched to German. It also made the story a sort of anthropological review, because I am not really myself. I'm completely myself in my story. I wouldn't really resist it. And there is absolutely no distance, because many people are talking, yeah, language gives you a distance, emotional distance. I mean, I cannot read my texts. So actually it makes everything, it brings everything to a certain point of like if it would have been possible for a German person to write the story. One more reason. I really love German Wanderung. So it's a sort of romantic Ludwig Tieck, I don't know, so sort of a really early romantic narrative. And also in German, there are no feminine endings, and it's very, very important. So in German, I am just a young guy with a backpack, wandering across the Europe, pretending to be, I don't know, one of these people who are actually looking for a blue flower or whatever. So it's very, very strange what kind of... so in German I am more a person, and in Russian I am a woman. And it's very strange, so it's really hard now to switch to Russian because I like overwhelmed of my femininity, and I'm not sure I like it. So there are many more things, and I will mention really only one more, which really struck me. And it's also part of the book. 7 generations of my family worked with глухонемые, deaf and mute kids. My mother used to say 7 generations of our family taught deaf and mute kids. And it's like really funny because my mother teaches history. So does it mean that she regards history as a deaf, mute, whatever? So actually I counted only 5 generations, but just because my mother teaches history, she always used this kind of mythological numbers, like 7 or 3 or whatever. It's very typical for this kind of storytelling. And when I was almost finishing the book, somehow I realized, because I'm writing in German, so I didn't notice that немой, which is mute, and you know that, is also немецкий. So it's one of the derivation of the word in Slavic languages. So there were Barbaren who were talking like that, and there were Germans who were Немцы, немые. Of course, it's a sort of like folks etymologization, but it doesn't matter because it's how we perceive things. It's not about a real history of language. And then I was really like, what I'm doing, I'm writing in the language which is perceived as a mute language, and it's немецкий. So it means I'm still in the family business. And it's really strange because it's not about metaphors, it's about how metaphors are ruling us. It means that in the beginning it was the language, actually. So, one more thing. We grew up in this kind of strange culture, singing Bach without knowing German. And I spent 10 years in the choir singing all kind of Bach things. And actually there is one story in book which I realized later, written through one of the sequence of aria number 136 with this A-line. So we grew up in this strange culture between beauty of German poetry and music and all that, and at the same time with all this Hände hoch and Hitler kaputt and all that. So actually, I think for me it was important to write a book to make this language innocent for myself. So to bring this language to myself, and that's it. Yeah. So there are many other things.
I'm going to let you ask some questions to Katja if you would like, but I just first want to add to all that we said. I think it's really important to mention that Katja's book has this beautiful, really witty humor about it, and you're going to discover it for yourself once you read it. So would anyone like to ask Katja anything?
Otherwise Senka will read 30 other questions.
Yes, that I wrote about the book.
Yeah, but the translator is sitting just next to you. If you turn around. So the question was who translated?
Who translated the book?
Yeah, maybe. So I call this woman Mira. Okay. It's very interesting. Mira Dordejic. And she's sitting here. And actually it's very interesting because Mira, it's written here, перевод с немецкого, превела, because I thought it would be written, translated into Bosnian, and it's written, it's very, very interesting. And I'm very, very thankful to Mira. I think it was a really great work.
It was my pleasure.
Yeah, but of course, I mean, I talked to Mira and I really felt I'm lucky. But just to say I know the translation, I cannot say it, of course.
Do you have any more questions, maybe? Okay, thank you for coming. Thank you, Katja. I really hope that you're going to read this absolutely beautiful and absolutely important book. Thank you.